Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name is Nick. Welcome back to the Sympathizer, chapter 22. This time around, we are very nearly at the end of our journey with the Sympathizer. It seems that the Sympathizer's journey is coming to an end as well. I do know that there is a sequel to this book. I'm not sure if it's like a continuation of this story or just kind of in the same universe that this story takes place in. I haven't really done too much research on the second book that this author has written, but we are very, very close to coming to the end of this iteration of the book club. I'm really enjoying myself, really enjoying the book, and hopefully you are enjoying yourself as well. We're going to get back to our regularly scheduled programming this week. We'll do a really quick Barebone summary. We will do a more in-depth play-by-play. Then there's something about this chapter that I thought was just pretty cool, so I would like to explore that in a little bit more detail. But we're going to start out how we've been starting out the last 21 episodes, I guess, at this point, with a super Barebone summary for the Sympathizer, chapter 22. The Sympathizer's re-education continues. The Sympathizer and Mon share a tearful conversation regarding their respective futures. The Sympathizer's re-education finally ends after God knows how long. So like I said, we are kind of nearing the end of the Sympathizer's journey when it comes to this book. He finally cracks, or he finally reaches the point of enlightenment or understanding that is satisfactory for his captors, as he kind of says briefly towards the very, very end of the chapter. We have some really cool kind of form stuff going on in this chapter. That's kind of what we're going to look at a little bit deeper at the end of this episode. The kind of different way that the story is told in this chapter, and kind of the function of that different form. But first, before we get into that kind of situation, we are going to go through a play-by-play summary for the events of chapter 22. So to start this chapter off, we are once again placed back into the Sympathizer's point of view, but this time it is a detached voice that hovers above his corporeal body and watches the events of the chapter unfold. Sonny and the Major continue their observation from the corner of the room as the Commandant, the Doctor, and Mon return to the interrogation chamber, this time wearing their uniforms with their sidearms on their hips. The Sympathizer, the version that acts as spectator and narrator in this chapter, watches the following events unfold. The Commandant presses his finger to the Sympathizer's eyeball, which is a not-so-subtle callback to the murder of Sonny. And once again, the Sympathizer pleads for sleep. The Commandant says that he can sleep when his answers are satisfactory. The Sympathizer defends himself by saying that he spoke up for the courier, but it isn't his fault that nobody listened to him. The Commandant replies that he, the Doctor, and Mon were all willing to be martyrs, willing to sacrifice themselves for the cause, and the Sympathizer's great crime is that he was unwilling to sacrifice himself for the agent. The three men in unison call for the Sympathizer to finally admit his error, which he does. The Sympathizer admits to not doing enough to save the agent, and he is racked by shame and guilt. A tornado of emotions, which is what he says, a tornado of emotions exit the Sympathizer, and the men in the room avert their eyes from the display. The Commissar and Commandant have a brief conversation about the progress of the re-education and the balance of the Sympathizer's scale in terms of his contributions to the war effort. The Commissar mentions that he may not have saved the courier in that instance, and because her body was broken but not her spirit, his taking the lives of Sonny and the Major could outweigh his failures, mentioning also the life of his father. The Commandant questions the Sympathizer about his role in his father's death, and he realizes his contributions. He wrote to Mon saying that he wished his father was dead, to which Mon took as the green light to assassinate his father. We learn that the Sympathizer's father did not die of illness the way he previously thought, but by a gunshot wound to the head while listening to his assassin's confession, and that the agent the Sympathizer failed to save arranged the hit. The Commandant considers the killing of his father, who was a colonizer and a dealer of the opiate to the masses, and the Sympathizer says that his death was not murder, but a just sentence, which was all I ever wanted to write. Considering this new information, the Commandant turns to leave with the doctor, giving Mon and the Sympathizer the room once again. Mon continues to ask the Sympathizer what is more precious than independence and freedom, to which the Sympathizer responds happiness and love, both clearly incorrect. The Sympathizer wishes for death, and Mon seems to prepare to oblige him. He removes his sidearm, a Tokarev, from his holster and loads a bullet into the chamber. I kind of want to read this little segment here with the Sympathizer talking about the sound of the bullet entering the gun. He says, "The sound of the bullet loading into the chamber was as clear as the bell of my father's church, which my mother and I heard from our hovel every Sunday morning. Looking down on myself, I could still see the child in the man and the man in the child. I was ever always divided, although it was only partially my fault. While I chose to live 2 lives and be a man of 2 minds, it was hard not to, given how people had always called me a bastard. Our country itself was cursed, bastardized, partitioned into North and South, and if it could be said of us that we chose division and not death in our uncivil war, that was also only partially true. We had not chosen to be debased by the French, to be divided by them into an unholy trinity of North, Center, and South, to be turned over to the great powers of capitalism and communism for further bisection, then given roles as the clashing armies of a Cold War chess match played in air-conditioned rooms by white men wearing suits and lies. No, just as my abused generation was divided before birth, so was I divided on birth, delivered into a postpartum world where hardly anyone accepted me for who I was, but only ever bullied me into choosing between my 2 sides. This was not simply hard to do. No, it was truly impossible, for how could I choose me against myself? Now my friend would release me from this small world with its small-minded people, those mobs who treated a man with 2 minds and 2 faces as a freak, who wanted only one answer for any question." So I think that this segment also really kind of plays into the Man of Two Faces motif. You know, we get so much of the Man of Two Faces motif, the Man of Two Minds. This is really kind of a culmination of all of that rolled into one. You know, the bisection of Vietnam into North and South, into capitalist and communist, into the bisection of him between French and Vietnamese, into him being a sleeper agent for the communists while also pledging allegiance to the capitalists. It's just kind of an exploration for him, the final exploration of this Man of Two Faces motif that he's kind of working through as he prepares himself for death. The Sympathizer is then surprised to see Mon kneel by the mattress and begin to unbind his hand. He places the gun in the Sympathizer's hand and presses the muzzle between his eyes, stating that he is the only one who can do this for him. The 2 old friends weep together, and the Sympathizer asks why he is doing this. Mon says that he can barely stand to see the Sympathizer afflicted so, and that he cannot save him without the affliction. Mon ponders that even if the Sympathizer is able to save himself through his re-education, what will happen to Bon? Sympathizer says that if Bon is unable to leave, then he will not escape either, and Mon prophesies morbidly, "And so you will die here." Mon presses the barrel of the gun firmly to his head, imploring the Sympathizer to shoot him first. He then admits to something terrible that he would not admit to anyone but his closest friend and confidant. He's kind of become disillusioned by the party, and he has become terrified of the education that he is responsible for providing. He says, "Now that we are powerful, we don't need the French or the Americans to fuck us over. We can fuck ourselves just fine." I think that this is another direct callback to a situation that occurred during the Sympathizer's confession. It's kind of a callback to Bon's monologue in the liquor store with the 2 shoplifting teenagers, where he says, "We are the only species that can fuck ourselves." So it's kind of interesting to see all of those kind of ideas and those motifs come full circle. Mon requests again that the Sympathizer shoot him, inquiring how a teacher lives teaching something that he does not believe in, but the Sympathizer says something like he would rather shoot himself first. We don't really get to know what he says word for word, because in the book it says, "I said something like," so that's why I said he says something like he would rather shoot himself first. Mon laughs and drops the Sympathizer's hand, which sends the pistol clattering to the floor. Sonny and the Major eye the pistol longingly from the corner of the room, and Mon apologizes, saying that his actions were foolish and weak, continuing that if he were to die, then the Sympathizer and Bone would surely be next. Now, though, with the Sympathizer sparing Mon's life, he and Bone can finally save themselves. The Sympathizer once again asks for sleep, but Mon says only after he answered his question. He leaves the room after saying, "This is for your own good," and Sonny and the Major comment on this, saying, "Those are some of the most dangerous words that you can hear." As if on cue, the speakers in the corner of the room begin to play the wails of a distressed baby. Sonny and the Major immediately dissipate, and the Sympathizer is left by himself with the sound of the crying. The Sympathizer is kind of tortured by the tape of the screaming baby for long enough that time begins to run cyclically. He considers the baby and apologizes to his mother for his screaming as a child. He thinks through his entire life cycle, from single-celled organism to fully realized human, all while mentioning the various screamers of his history: a baby, the agent, his mother, an unknown source, and finally himself. The chapter ends with him finally reaching both enlightenment and Mon's desired answer: nothing. So like I said, I think that this chapter is kind of a culmination of a lot of different ideas. It's kind of exploring the cyclical nature of history and how Mon and the Commandant and even the Sympathizer in some capacity, they all repeat things that were said throughout the book. They all are calling back and, re-engaging with things that were already said and done throughout the book, pressing his eyeball to see whether or not he's dead, we can fuck ourselves, all this stuff kind of harkens back to stuff that's already happened in the book. The Sympathizer even talks about how time starts running on a loop rather than in a straight line. So I think this is kind of the culmination of that idea. Also, the whole Man of Two Faces motif finally starts to materialize and, reach a conclusion more or less with the Sympathizer preparing himself for death. We kind of get an end point to that motif. So yeah, I think that this is kind of a conclusion to a lot of the kind of ideas that we've been exploring throughout the book. The nature of the Man of Two Faces, the nature of time and of identity and of all of those different things. I much enjoyed this chapter. I enjoyed it a lot more than the prior two chapters. It's a lot tamer, of course, than the last two chapters, so that probably has something to do with why I enjoyed it just a little bit more than the last couple. But yeah, I think also the thing that made me enjoy this chapter so much was the kind of form that this chapter takes, that Viet Thanh Nguyen chooses to use throughout this chapter. That's something that I kind of want to explore a little bit more in today's deep dive. I titled this section of my notes "Form and Function" in chapter 22. The dissociation theme in this chapter is pretty expertly explored. The way that the Sympathizer kind of sees the conversations unfolding and the fact that he is a witness the same way that we are is really, really interesting. And I think it's incredibly well done. The form of this chapter, reading almost as a screenplay during the conversation points, helps to kind of heighten the intensity and make the insights that the Sympathizer provides all the more interesting and worthwhile. I think that it also puts us into a retrospective mindset rather than us kind of experiencing things as he experiences. We take a couple chapters there, I believe 19, 20, 21. We take those chapters and we kind of get back to the present time, and then this chapter, and I assume chapter 23, they kind of are retrospective in the way that chapters 1 through 18 kind of are. So if the first 18 chapters, I want to say, is the past, the chapter 19, 20, 21 was the kind of present, and then chapter 22 and 23, they exist kind of after the events of the story, and they exist in kind of a retrospective kind of time frame as well. For nearly the entire book, we've gotten conversations, interactions, explanations of events, etc., from the perspective of the Sympathizer, who is clearly an unreliable narrator, absolutely motivated by his desire to appease his captors and highlight his culpability. This segment, utilizing the kind of form that when chooses to use, peels back a lot of that noise and shows the events as they truly are, of course, outside of the hallucinations of Sonny and the Major. The dissociation of the sympathizer between his body and mind also helps to highlight the depths of Mon's hopelessness. I think that a really neat parallel can be kind of drawn between the sympathizer's confession to Sonny before he murders him, before the sympathizer murders him, and Mon's confession to the sympathizer in this sequence. The two men are both kind of at their lowest points. Both feel like they really have nothing to lose by admitting to their shortcomings because of the prescribed outcomes of their situations. The sympathizer knows that Sonny will have to be killed regardless of his admissions, in kind of the same way that Mon knows that there will be no real negative implications for his confessions here. Nobody is going to believe the ramblings of a tortured man that hasn't slept in days, especially when it comes to the faithlessness of the commissar of the prison camp. I think the fact that this segment kind of reads like a screenplay really helps to heighten the mood, make it a little bit more intense. You can kind of see the events unfold in a way that may have been a little bit more difficult throughout the rest of the book. All that this segment is really missing is stage directions. We know the location, we know the kind of we know the setting, we know the circumstances, we know all of that stuff. So getting to read this segment as though it was a screenplay, I think really helps to show the events and broadcast the events in a way that's much different than the previous chapters. It helps to kind of disentangle the unreliability of the narrator in the sympathizer from the reality of the situation, and it kind of just helps to make things a little bit more clean and clear cut throughout the chapter. I think for the most part, that's all that I've got for chapter 22. Next chapter is going to be our last recap. Like I said in a previous video, I'm not sure which one, we'll do a recap of chapter 23, the way that we've been doing them up to this point so far. We'll do, regularly scheduled programming when it comes to chapter 23, and then we are probably going to do a kind of recap video of the questions that the publisher has posted on the book's page on their website. We'll kind of explore some of the themes and the topics that they find valuable, and just kind of work through them and see what we can see. With all that being said, if you've got anything that you're excited about that we could potentially check out for the next book club, please let me know. Like I said before, I've got some stuff that I'm interested in going through one more time, some stuff that I've already read, some stuff that I'm interested in reading. So if you've got any advice or any kind of stuff that you're excited about, feel free to give me a shout. Yeah, if you got anything else for this chapter that I may have missed, please let me know. Let me know what you thought about the chapter as well. Like I said before, I think that this is probably the favorite of the last few. The bar is pretty low with this one, but I think that this chapter is really rad. I'm excited to see where the story goes from here, and I'm excited to kind of get to the end of it. I'm not really excited for it to be over, but I'm excited to kind of see how everything shakes out from here. I think that's all I got for this one. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.